Your dog, he walks into a room and he stops and he won't move. And he stares at one corner and he slowly sniffs the air or the quality. And he places himself in the room between whatever is there and between you. And most people would immediately ask if this is probably a mouse or a human sound he's hearing. But the Kabbalist would tell a completely different story entirely. And once you begin to look at the world through the viewpoint of a Kabbalist, something rather beautiful starts to happen. You realize that your dog is not reacting randomly. He reacts differently depending on the quality of the environment he finds himself in. The Kabbalists believe that creation is not spiritually uniform. Just as there are places that nourish us physically and places that exhaust us physically, they thought that environments also possess different energetic qualities. Some support life, some simply exist without leaving much of an impression. Others become burdened by whatever has accumulated in these places over time. And your dog appears to recognize those differences immediately. So think back to the places your dog genuinely loves. Perhaps it is a particular spot in your garden, a favorite room in your house, in your home, an old tree during your morning walk. There are places where your dog immediately relaxes. He changes his breathing, his muscles soften, he stretches, he lies down and he falls asleep, and he doesn't hesitate to do that. Within the Kabbalistic tradition, these are places where the energetic quality is just a good quality. It's in harmony. The life force flows naturally, and the nefesh, the soul quality of the dog, recognizes harmony in these places. And then there are places that seem to mean very, very little. Your dog walks through them without stopping. He notices them, but they do not leave an impression on him. There is no attraction and there is also no resistance. You can say he simply does not care. Most of our daily environment probably belongs to this category. It's just energetically neutral. Nothing calls for our attention and nothing calls for the dog's attention. But there is a third category that almost every dog owner has witnessed at some point. Your dog enters a room and quietly stops. Not dramatically, and he's just uncomfortable and he refuses to move for a few moments. Sometimes he watches one particular corner, and sometimes he just sniffs the air, and sometimes he chooses to sit between you and that part of the room. Sometimes it's simply a decision from the dog that he does not want to leave, and most people immediately begin searching for a physical explanation. The Kabbalistic tradition invites us to pose a second question in that moment. What if your dog is responding to the energetic quality of that place? Not to a spirit, not to a ghost, but just to the accumulated atmosphere that he experiences and that was left behind. Kabbalah teaches that human thoughts, emotions, and actions are not isolated events. They leave an imprint upon reality. Places where there has been prolonged conflict often feel different from places where people have lived in peace and harmony. Rooms in which people have suffered can carry a very different atmosphere from rooms in which people have healed or lived happily. Whether we consciously notice those differences or not, the tradition suggests that the nefesh, the animal soul, often does. This is where I think dogs become extraordinary teachers. because they never argue with their perception. If something feels in harmonies, they relax. If something feels neutral, they continue whatever they do. If something feels dense, they become attentive. There is no ideology, no belief system, no attempt to convince themselves that what they are perceiving cannot possibly be true. They simply respond to the energy. And perhaps that is what we have forgotten how to do. Not to become fearful of the unseen, but to become sensitive once again to the qualities of the world we already inhabit. So before we continue, let's get a little bit the framework we built here. The first principle is that the Kabbalistic tradition understands perception as something much richer than the 5 physical senses. The second is that animals experience reality primarily through the nephesh. This is the animal soul, which allows them to respond to the immediate qualities of an environment without constantly filtering those impressions through analysis. And the third is perhaps the most practical of all. If we learn to observe our animals, our dogs, carefully, they may quietly help us to recover a sensitivity that human beings have never completely lost, only forgotten how to trust. And that brings us to the most interesting question of all. If dogs can recognize the different qualities of energy so naturally, is it possible for us to learn to recognize these energies again as well? I believe this is one of the reasons animals have accompanied human beings for thousands of years, not just because of their normal senses, not simply because they protect us, and not simply because they offer companionship, but because they quietly remind us that perception is much richer than modern culture often allows. The Kabbalists never suggested that we should become fascinated with the extraordinary experiences just for their own sake. In fact, quite the opposite. The purpose of spiritual development is not to escape reality, but to perceive reality more accurately. Perhaps your dog is already living that lesson. Think about what usually happens when your dog suddenly stops during a walk. Most of us, just out of instinct, pull on the leash. We assume the dog has become distracted. We call him, we encourage him to continue because we just want to move on. But what would happen if just once you stopped as well? Not because you expect to see something unusual, simply because you become curious. What happens if you stand quietly for 30 seconds without trying to explain anything? Notice your own breathing in this 30 seconds. Notice your body. Notice whether the place feels open or completely ordinary, or if you feel something dense. Do not imagine anything. Do not force an experience. The Kabbalistic path has always begun with observation before interpretation. That is an important distinction, because the moment we begin inventing stories, perception becomes imagination. But when we patiently observe the same patterns over months, sometimes years, our discernment becomes remarkably precise. This is why I would never encourage anyone to believe everything they experience. But I would equally never encourage somebody to dismiss an experience simply because it does not fit in their current understanding of reality and how the world functions. The Kabbalists choose a third path at that moment. They continue testing. They allow reality itself to become the teacher. And your dog has no ideology. And he does not identify with anything. He has no desire to be right. He simply responds to what he encounters. And perhaps that is why animals so often become our greatest teachers without ever speaking a single word. They remind us of what perception looked like before the mind became louder than the experience itself. Today we explored this question through the Kabbalistic tradition. We looked at what the animals can perceive. We discovered the nephesh, the living soul of the animal, and how the nephesh responds directly to the energetic qualities of the world around it. We explored the possibility that places themselves carry different conditions. They can be in harmony, they can be neutral, they can be dense, and that your dog maybe is responding to these qualities long before you consciously recognize them. More importantly, we discovered that the real lesson is not about our dog or cat or another animal, because if perception can be clouded, perhaps it can also become clear again. And that raises another question at this point. If places possess different energetic qualities, what happens when those qualities begin to interact with your own energy? I hope you enjoyed this content. My name is Nikki Sabiti. There is a link for a free tool for testing the old traditions for yourself in the description. It's called Begin. Please like and subscribe if you like this content, and I see you in the next episode. Thank you for watching.